Hello again. What do you call it when the Pope eats a donut? A papal indulgence. I'm proud of that one. Okay, obviously today we're going to be talking about a few things, but one of them has to do with why so many medievals went on crusade to the Holy Land. And this is because they were incentivized to do so by something called a papal indulgence. So we're going to talk about what that is later in the lesson. All right, but first we're going to be talking about Magna Carta again. So if you've been paying attention in previous lessons, I've talked about Magna Carta quite a bit. I think almost everything I'm going to talk about when it comes to Magna Carta today has been discussed in previous lessons. So very little of this is going to be new to you. All right, but it'll be a good review because Magna Carta is an extremely important legal document, not only for understanding the history of Europe, but really for understanding the history of all of Western politics and law. Right? Magna Carta is one of the foundational legal documents of the Western world. All right. So you'll recall that Magna Carta was a legal document that King John of England very reluctantly signed in 1215 because he was being pressured by the nobles and also by the Catholic Church to do so. And they knew King John is kind of this like really sucky, weak king, and we need to take power away from him because he's abusing this power. All right. So who was King John? King John was a descendant of William of Normandy. Remember, William of Normandy conquers the Anglo-Saxons, drives out the Anglo-Saxons from England, killing many of them in the Battle of Hastings. He ascends to the throne of England and is known as William the Conqueror. And he introduces the Norman culture into England. And so as a Norman, William the Conqueror ruled both England as well as Normandy, which is in northern France. Right? Well, King John, as a descendant of William the Conqueror, is also a Norman, and he believes that he too has legal authority over not only England, but also Normandy, which at this time is being ruled by the barons and nobles of France, who are not English, not Normans. So, like I said, King John is a really incompetent, ineffective king. And this is primarily because he does not manage his nobles very well. And he's very, very bad at battlefield strategy. King John just likes to charge headlong into battle without really thinking things through. And, he thinks, I'm the king of England. I have this huge, massive, powerful army. I can just march into Normandy and take it back. Right? Well, this is a really stupid thing to assume because the Normans were not intent on returning Normandy back to the King of England. All right. So King John wages a bunch of losing battles in Normandy, and only 5 years into his reign, King John basically lost complete control of Normandy. He did have some control of French lands, but he lost so many battles that he pretty much lost all control over France just 5 years into his reign. Right? And in order to get those lands back, he had to raise an army. He had to acquire a lot of money to do this. And in order to acquire this wealth, where are you going to get it from? You're going to get it from the two sources in England that have wealth. These are the barons. Barons, remember, are a term we use to describe nobles. And also, he's going to try to get it from the Catholic Church, right? So, by the year 1215, the barons had had enough of King John's taxes. And actually, before 1215, the Catholic Church stopped paying taxes to King John altogether. They were never happy about paying taxes to the king in the first place. Remember the dispute between the Pope and the Holy Roman Emperor had to do over who served who. the kings of England and France and the Holy Roman Emperor, they all believed that the church worked for them and that they were ultimately spiritually subject to the Pope in Rome. But the church said, nope, the kings of Europe, the Holy Roman Emperor, they do not have the power to tax us. They can't tax our churches. They can't tax the bishops. They can't tax the monasteries or the convents. They can't tax church property at all. Right? Well, this is a major potential source of revenue. And again, King John desperately needs money in order to wage war in Normandy. Right? The barons are not willing to shoulder the burden of paying for an army to give to King John, who they think is just going to charge into Normandy like he always does, lose a bunch of battles and retreat. Right? They don't necessarily mind paying taxes if you win, but they are not okay with paying taxes if they're going to continue to lose. So you got the barons are really angry. The church is really stubborn and obstinate and not willing to pay taxes to King John. So a group of rebellious barons got together and under the guidance of a few bishops, there's one particular bishop, you don't need to know who he is, in England, and they drafted a document called Magna Carta. And they agreed that they were going to confront King John and basically give him an ultimatum. Sign this legal document, Magna Carta, or you could face rebellion. Right? You're going to have a war on your hands among your barons who don't like you. All right. So what does Magna Carta do? Basically, at its most basic level, Magna Carta limits the power of the king and protects the rights of the church, of the nobles, and individual citizens of England. Right? It makes the king subject to the law. Magna Carta, if you had to summarize it in one word, in one sentence, Magna Carta says the king has to obey the law. Right? That's how you would summarize it in one sentence. Before that, it was believed that kings were above the law. Right? Kings could make law, but they didn't have to follow it. Right? Kings are believed to be sort of like these all-powerful beings within their jurisdiction. Right? Magna Carta also does some other things. It limits the king's power to tax the barons. It says he can't tax the church, right? So it gives the barons more rights and the church more protections. Magna Carta establishes an idea called the law of the land. Right? Now, the law of the land in England, unlike the rest of Europe, which is under Roman law, the law of the land of England is English law, which comes from the Anglo-Saxons. The rest of Europe follows the Code of Justinian, which comes from the Roman Empire. Right? Law of the land in Magna Carta says we're not going to follow the Code of Justinian. We're going to inherit a tradition, a legal tradition from the Anglo-Saxons, and we're going to kind of combine it with some Roman ideas. We're going to combine it with some ideas about individual freedom and dignity present inside of the Catholic Church. And we're going to put this all together in this idea called law of the land. Right? So in England, there's a mix of church law and Anglo-Saxon or English common law. So what is common law? Common law are laws that are made by judges and courts. Normally when laws are made, elected officials called legislatures will write the laws. Right? And they'll write them based on their attempts to represent the people who voted for them. Right? Common law says, no. These laws are not going to be made by elected officials. These laws are going to be made by judges and courts. Right? So if you have a legal dispute with someone, you bring your dispute to a court. And if there's a judge who's in charge, the judge is going to resolve that dispute, and he's going to write down rules that are going to apply to future similar cases. This is called common law. Common law is a very difficult idea for junior high kids to understand. So if you don't get it, it's okay. Don't worry about it. We've got plenty of time to learn what common law is. It's just that it pops up a lot in your book, so you're going to need to know at least a basic idea of what that means. Right? Now, common law again, this is laws made by judges. They're not laws that are written down in a book anywhere. An important idea that comes out of the English common law is something called habeas corpus, right? So habeas corpus, like common law, is a very complicated idea. But basically, it is a court order that requires that an arrested person be brought before a court, right? So without habeas corpus, if you are arrested, you could just rot in jail forever. You might never have a court day, right? Theoretically, without habeas corpus, you could be arrested, not told why you're being arrested, thrown into prison, and executed, and then you have no idea why, right? Habeas corpus says, no, prisoners have certain rights, right? You have a right to go to a court and find out what you're being charged with, what you're being accused of. To some extent, you have a right to defend yourself against these accusations. So habeas corpus decreases the right of the government and increases the right of people who have been arrested. Right? So the way habeas corpus worked is when someone was arrested, the jailer, the person in charge of keeping custody of this arrested person in prison, would receive a sheet of paper called a writ of habeas corpus, right? And this writ of habeas corpus says you either have to release the prisoner or you have to tell the court why you have a really good reason for this person being in jail, right? So if Vanessa is one day arrested and she doesn't know why and she's brought to prison, she can ask for a writ of habeas corpus, right? She can say to the jailer, I need a writ of habeas corpus. And so then a court would send a writ of habeas corpus to the jail, and the jailer would either have to tell Vanessa and the court why she's in jail, or he would have to let her go. That's the choice. All right? So it limits the ability of the government to basically exercise its authority over prisoners, and by doing so, it increases the rights of people who have been accused of crimes, right? Again, habeas corpus, just like common law, is a very difficult thing to understand, so if you don't get it, that's okay. All right, another thing Magna Carta does is it creates something called a Council of Nobles, which is going to become Parliament, right? It's a group of nobles that limit the king's power to tax. So in a previous lesson, we learned how they did this. Remember, in order for the king to be able to collect any new taxes, he had to get the approval of this Council of Nobles, this Parliament. Right? Now, over time, Parliament is going to evolve and it's going to become a representative body. That means not only does Parliament represent the nobles' interests, but it's also going to represent the interests of the citizens of England against the king or queen. So what does Parliament do? Parliament essentially splits the power of the English monarchy into two groups, right? Some of it is going to stay with the king, with the throne of England, but some of it is going to be absorbed by the Parliament. Right? And over the centuries, the king is going to become weaker and the Parliament is going to become stronger.